Hello, my name is Melinda Smith, and I'm the Executive Director at HelpGuide. Today, I'm going to be talking with Patti Davis, the daughter of Ronald and Nancy Reagan and author of many books, including The Long Goodbye, a memoir about losing her father to Alzheimer's disease. In 2011, Patti founded a support group for family members and friends of Alzheimer's patients called Beyond Alzheimer's, which can be found at Geisinger Medical Center in Pennsylvania and Cleveland Clinic in Las Vegas. That work ultimately led to her latest book, Floating in the Deep End: How Caregivers Can See Beyond Alzheimer's. From initial diagnosis to stages of grief, Patti guides readers through what to expect, how to avoid caregiver burnout, and how to navigate the unique challenges that come up as you live alongside dementia. We hope this dialogue provides you with practical tips and emotional insights to help you through your journey. In your book, right in the very beginning, you write that after your father's Alzheimer's diagnosis, that you described feeling as though you were embarking on a trek through the Himalayas without a Sherpa, which I thought was very memorable. And then later you write that dementia is a landscape of unmarked trails. No one knows what's going to happen next. The only certainty is that it's going to get worse. So I feel like your book offers such an honest and unflinching look at the dementia caregiver's journey, and yet you also offer such a clear message of hope. And that's kind of what I'd like to ask you to talk about. Can you talk a little bit about your experience and how that led to this book?
Really, one of the first things that I thought about when my father was diagnosed was that I didn't believe his soul could have Alzheimer's. And when I was running my support group, I was very careful about, and I think I was careful in this book too, about talking about faith, because I'm very respectful of other people's beliefs or lack of beliefs. And I said the same thing in the book that I used to say in my support group, that if that goes contrary to your beliefs, the idea that a soul is in there untouched and kind of separate from what is going on in the body, that's okay. Your beliefs are none of my business. Just consider the possibility, because you don't know that it's not true, and you might as well. And it's going to change how you go on this journey. So that kind of, anchored me. That said, it is scary because you don't know. But I've seen the problems of people thinking that they do know what's going to happen. And one of the big things that people come up with a lot is the marker of when my loved one no longer knows who I am. That's their big marker. I will consider in-home care, or I will consider a facility when my parent or my spouse, whoever it is, no longer knows who I am. Well, that could happen early, but ultimately it's going to happen. It could happen early, it could happen later. If it happens later, they could be wandering off down the street and end up, 10 miles away, or get into a stranger's car, or burn the house down, and they still know who you are. So you've made a decision that is going to probably get you in trouble, rather than saying, I have no idea what's going to happen here. Obviously, you have to take steps and you have to make decisions. So I'm not saying just sit back and go, oh yeah, whatever. I'm not saying that. But I am saying internally to not think that you have a roadmap. You're going to be healthier in this experience if you know that you don't have a roadmap here. Right?
Right.
It seems kind of counterintuitive, but
it does. And it's hard, I think, from a human perspective. We always want to make sense of things and try to plan out things.
Right. And like I said, you do have to make some plans. I mean, you do have to think ahead, and you have to. That's why I tried to organize it in this book. There are some things that right out of the gate, you might want to get your legal stuff in order. You might want to get medical power of attorney in order. And that can be a tricky thing. It's not always that let's say it's your mother who has Alzheimer's. Maybe your father is not the best person for medical power of attorney. Maybe she has expressed that she doesn't want any extraordinary measures taken if she has a heart attack or she has a stroke or something like that. She'd like to be let go. But your father doesn't believe that. Well, he's probably not the best person then to have medical power of attorney. And those are tough decisions. Those are tough things to talk about in a family. But that's something you want to talk about at the very beginning. The driving thing is something you want to address right at the beginning. I don't care what the DMV says. I don't care if they give them a 6-month license. You really don't want someone with dementia driving around. So, you need to sort of look at, like, what do we need to deal with now? And, the other things are going to come in home care, ultimately, whether or not you want to put your loved one in a facility or not. But there are some immediate things that you need to deal with. But I think just the overall idea of, we want to be in control of things. I mean, that's just sort of human nature. And I think one of the great lessons of this disease is to realize we're really not in control. There's so much that we can't control. I remember someone in my support group saying that they had finally gotten an in-home care person. I said, well, but it's just even more exhausting for me, because now I have to, boss them around and tell them what to do. And I said, well, either you got the wrong caregiver if they don't know what to do, or you're just still in the mode of controlling things. And they said, well, no, they're very good at caregiving. And they said, well, this is just who I am. I'm just a very controlling person. It's just who I am. And I said, well, there's who we are, and then there's who we're supposed to be. And I don't think God put people on this earth and go, okay, you're going to be really controlling, right? You're going to fall short of everything, and you're going to mess everything up, right? We're supposed to rise above these tendencies in ourselves. Here's your opportunity, right? Let the caregiver be the caregiver.
Yeah, and you do say that, this is tough for anybody. There's so many change. I mean, Alzheimer's is all about change, and change is difficult for everyone, but it's particularly, the journey is going to be that much rougher if you're one of those people that just does feel like they need to control things.
Right. Because it's like you're fighting against the ocean. The disease is in control. I mean, that's just the truth of it. The disease is going to take that individual where it takes them, and you don't know. And your health is going to be better, and your emotional stability is going to be better if you go, okay, well, this is going to be interesting. I wonder where it's going to take them. You can learn a lot I learned a lot about my father in the 10 years that he had Alzheimer's. Sometimes people learn things about their parent that they wish they hadn't learned, but still, you're learning about that person, because we all tend to think of our parents just in the box of being our parents. They had a life before that. They're not just your parent, right? They were a younger adult. They were an adolescent. They were a child. You get windows into all of that, and it can help explain a lot of who they were as your parent.
That's one thing I really loved in your book, where you really talked about the fact that you can, if you're willing to open yourself up to a new relationship with this person, which you have to surrender that old relationship, it's going to go away. Mm-hmm. And if you are open, you're going to, like you said, you're going to learn things about that person that you didn't know. You're going to have opportunities to connect in ways you wouldn't have.
Alzheimer's is, any kind of dementia really is a stripping away to the essence of that person, which can be a good thing or a bad thing. In my father's case, it was a good thing because he was a very kind and gentle person. So stripping everything away, he was a kind and gentle person. Other people, things are stripped away, personas we all develop personas to get through this earth. We don't we don't, walk out there emotionally naked all the time. But other people, when that's stripped away, it can be kind of shocking. I mean, I remember somebody saying to me, well, my father was somebody's father. Once he got Alzheimer's, then he turned into a racist. And I went, well, now wait a minute here. Are you saying you never saw any indication ever of any sort? Well, yeah, there were a couple of times like he used the N-word, or there were a couple of comments, but I just thought he didn't know any better. Well, Alzheimer's doesn't turn you into a racist, but it certainly can strip everything away so that part of you is revealed. That's not a pleasant thing to see in a parent, but it can be interesting. I mean, it's always about sort of stepping back. And again, it's a balancing act. You want to own your emotions and not deny them, but at the same time, step back and kind of look at the bigger picture, right? This is who this human being was who happened to give birth to me.
You have one example in the book, which is, an extreme example, but still I thought it was really interesting. The woman who never had really liked her grandmother. She'd felt she was very cold and closed off. And then when her grandmother got Alzheimer's and she regressed to her childhood, she was a child in Nazi Germany and her parents had died in the camps and she'd barely survived. And I thought that was, wow, she finally understood. It didn't change the relationship she'd had, but
she'd known it factually. Everybody had known it factually, but because Alzheimer's is a regressing to other stages, the woman actually returned there. So she really got to see almost in real time what she had gone through. Yeah.
You really talk a lot in your book about how Alzheimer's, while it's stripping away that person, it's also stripping away, like you said, these kind of personas we have built up, that like old resentments and things we've papered over, maybe not fully dealt with, and how it brings a lot of that stuff up.
Yeah.
And then to be dealing with that at the same time as you're in this incredibly overwhelming, difficult situation. How do you manage that?
Well, I think it starts with a decision. And I think, when I started my support group, I thought, I don't want to do a support group that is just about, what do I do when? What do I do if my loved one, if my parent or whoever wanders off, or how do I get the car keys away? Obviously I deal with all of that, and that's really important. But I want to go deeper. And in this book, I wanted to go deeper and say, who are you in this situation? And I was using my own experience as being the informative factor there. When my father was diagnosed, I thought, I want to really show up for this experience, whatever it's going to be. I have no idea what's going to happen here, but I want to show up for it, and I want to show up fully. And I knew that meant I had to grow up. I just had to grow up. I couldn't be that girl anymore who wanted daddy's attention and was never going to get it. None of my father's children got the attention from him that we wanted. And he didn't do it deliberately, and he didn't do it out of cruelty. He just didn't know how. He had an alcoholic father who, where would he have learned conscious parenting, So I was very aware of that. And so it was a decision I made. And, like any decision, it's not like you just do it and then, oh, great. Okay, I'm there. Sometimes you make quantum leaps and sometimes you backslide. And I have to say, it was much easier to accomplish that if I was just with my father. When my mother came in the room, it was a whole different movie. But then I was 14 again. But you start with that decision, and once you make that decision, I think then you have more clarity about the moments when you are coming from that place, from a long ago place, rather than the adult that you are, So I would always say to people, and I said in this book also, before saying, what should I do in this situation? Ask yourself, who am I right now in this situation? Because if you're still a resentful 17-year-old, you're not going to do very well. You're not going to get the car keys away from your parent. If you're that pissed off 17-year-old whose parents, exiled them because you told them you were gay or something like that, right? You have to show up as an adult in order to accomplish adult things.
And how do you do talk a lot about anger in the book, because when you're wounded from childhood, obviously you have those hurts and you have your emotions. And like you said, it's a balancing act because you don't want to deny what you're feeling. You have to acknowledge it. But at the same time, like you said, you can't let it take over or you're just going to exacerbate a bad situation. So what is that balancing act? How do you, I would imagine that that's probably where support comes in and like your support group, right?
Yeah. Well, and I wanted this book to be sort of a portable support group. I wanted it to be a handbook that you could just refer to with all these things. And, I think the important thing to understand about anger is that anger is never just anger. It always sits on top of something else, usually fear, oftentimes grief, but, usually fear. So if you start by understanding that, then you have a little bit of an understanding of your anger. And I'm not talking about the moments when you get angry, when someone, runs a stop sign and almost crashes into you. I'm talking about that kind of slow burn of anger that you carry with you. So again, it's a stripping away and peeling away and looking at what's really underneath this. Why do I feel so angry? It's because we're scared. And anger is a much easier place to go to than fear. We don't want to be scared. And by the way, other people don't want to hear about our fears. Other people are much more willing to hear about our anger. Anger is much more sort of permissible, especially these days in society than fear. People get nervous if you talk to them about their fears because it brings up their own and they don't want to hear it. But if you go, I'm just really pissed off at them, they'll go there with you. Right.
That's so interesting. And you're right. Especially in our society, especially these kinds of fears, when you're talking about death and these tough things.
Right.
These are very real, legitimate fears that you as a caregiver are going through. And, you do mention one of the biggest ones is this fear of that moment when your loved one forgets who you are and doesn't know you anymore. And so they're real. You've got to deal with it. And you say that what you need to do is kind of drag that out into the light because it takes away some of that power. So I was just kind of would like to hear a little bit more about what you mean.
Well, also, that moment of that inevitability, really, they're not going to know who I am. There are a couple of things there. First of all, if you even consider that the possibility that that person's soul doesn't have Alzheimer's, cognitively, they don't know who you are, but their soul knows who you are. So if you can anchor yourself in that, or at least just consider it, it gives you another perspective. Their brain cells are not firing to know what your name is, or even maybe know that you're their son or their daughter or their spouse. But there's a soul in there, and a lot of times those moments. I think the danger is that people hold up that moment as it's going to be the most horrible thing ever when they don't know who I am. They've already decided what it's going to be. So whatever it turns out to be, they're not really going to see it for what it is because they've already decided that it's horrible. When I knew that my father no longer knew who I was, it was actually a really beautiful moment. And I wrote about that. And I kind of suspected it for a while, but I was leaving my parents' house and I said, "Bye, Dad, I love you." And he looked really surprised and he said, "Oh, well, thank you. Thank you very much." And I thought, wow, in that moment, he doesn't know that I'm his daughter. So whoever he thinks I am, he is appreciative of the fact that I'm saying, "I love you." And I thought, if someone who I didn't know very well said, hi or bye or whatever, I love you, I'd go, what the hell's wrong with you? I wouldn't be that gracious. Like, what do you mean? What do you want from me? Right. But that's who he was. That was his essence. So it was actually a very revealing and very beautiful moment. But if I decided that it was going to be something else, then I would only see my decision. I wouldn't see what it really was.
The other thing you talked about is one thing that you have seen happen a lot is that they may forget who you are, but then they think you're somebody else from their life that they loved.
That they love. Right. So that love is what's important. Okay. So they think you're their sister and not their daughter, but they're still showing love to you. That whatever's coming from their heart, from their soul, that's still there. That's still real. That emotion is still there.
The other thing I want to talk about is grief and how unique the grieving process is in this situation. And you say, you point out Alzheimer's disease is a death before dying. And so that has implications for the person with Alzheimer's, for their loved ones. There's so many layers to that. And then one thing you talk about is how so many caregivers, their instinct is kind of to push that grief away.
Yeah.
You do point out, grief doesn't go away. You're going to have to deal with it eventually. But I would imagine that some people might think, well, that's fine. I'm so overwhelmed right now, and this is all my focus. That's okay for me to push it off. But I think that's problematic. And what would you say to somebody who was?
Well, what I wrote in the book, when I said to many people, is it's a human tendency to want to push grief away, whether it's Alzheimer's or anything else, because it hurts and we don't want to go there. And we feel like we'll drown in those waters, that's just a human feeling. And so we think if we push it out to the South 40, that it will just disintegrate, but it doesn't work like that. Grief is not biodegradable. It will wait for you and it will come find you. The problem with if it has to come find you is it will drive you to your knees. It will bring you to a standstill. You'll get ill. You'll get injured. Something is going to make you stay in that spot and have to deal with it. It's just sort of the way the wheel turns. And I saw that happen I saw an example of that many, many years ago, long before my father got Alzheimer's. I met a woman whose husband had died of cancer, and she had been the primary caregiver, and she kept him at home and did more probably than she should have. It wasn't that she didn't have money to have more outside care. She just chose to keep herself really busy caring for him herself. And after he died, like shortly after he died, she got agoraphobia. She could not leave her house. She would open the front door, she'd get a panic attack, and she'd be slammed back in. She was wise enough to realize what it was. And she said to me, I got it. I hadn't allowed myself to grieve. I kept myself so busy. I hadn't gone through any of the grief. And this is what happened to me. I was forced to sit in my house and grieve and deal with it. By the time I should not have agoraphobia anymore. It was so wise. And I always remembered that. And I certainly remembered it, when my father got ill. It's a perfect example. And I've seen other examples of that, where someone will, they'll get a fall and break their leg and they have to sit there. You don't want that. It's a lot better to just let it play out. And yes, there are going to be times when you feel like you're drowning there. It just is, but you won't drown there.
Yeah, I think it's the idea of it coming to find you. I don't think it's going to come to find you at convenient moments most of the time.
Exactly. Yeah, because it's like you pushed back this sort of tidal wave that it's just not going to work.
The other component of it is, as you say, especially in the early stages, your loved one is grieving. That they're really facing something really difficult.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to acknowledge that, but those
Mm-hmm.
conversations can be so intimidating. I mean,
They're hard.
Yeah, you're afraid you'll say the wrong thing, you'll make it worse. What's your advice for navigating those conversations?
I mean, it is hard. And I think especially if it's a parent, maybe you haven't had intimate conversations like that with them before. But, I've had people say to me, well, my loved one seems really depressed. The loved one is in the earlier stages of Alzheimer's or some other form of dementia, is really depressed. I think I should call the doctor and get them antidepressants. And I said, okay, well, they know that something's wrong with them. And they're still at a stage where they are cognizant of the fact that they are losing cognition. They're losing who they are. And they're grieving over that. Of course they're depressed. I mean, if 6 months from now they're still depressed, then maybe you might want to talk about medication. But let's just not reach for medication. Talk to them about it. But I think, it's our own fears also. If we acknowledge someone else's fear, if we acknowledge someone else's depression, someone else's grief, it takes us into our own, and we don't want to go there. It's like talking to someone about death. A lot of times people, even in the latter stages of Alzheimer's, have said, I'm dying. I know I'm dying, if they have a sort of a moment of lucidity. And they'll speak about that. And more often than not, the person hearing that will go, no, you're not. No, you're not. And I'm always said to people, don't do that. They want to talk about this. You don't want to talk about death because you're scared of death. We all are. And I think we have this irrational thought that if we talk about death, we'll invite it in, right? It'll blow into the room and it's not going to leave alone. So we better not talk about it. That's right, which makes no sense. It's healthier to talk about it. And they want to talk about it. Let them talk about it. Ask them questions. Ask them how they feel. Or if it's in the earlier stages, ask them how they feel about their world changing around them.
I think that's really the key, is just inviting them to share how they're feeling, rather than feeling like you have to have an answer or the right thing to say. Because I think that's where people get stuck a lot of the times.
Right. You don't have to have the right answer. The right answer is to let them talk. Mm-hmm. And then if there's something that you need to say, it will come to you. It will come to you if you're listening and you're present. It will come to you. But mostly it's listening to them and trying to understand where they're coming from. Listen, sometimes people are understandably really angry about the diagnosis that they've gotten. Why is this happening to me? Why isn't this happening to our neighbor? He's really mean. I don't know. I mean, there's no answer for that. I don't know.
You talk a lot about caregiver stress, obviously. That you've noticed from the support groups is one thing that people start to do really early on after a diagnosis. A lot of them start to really limit their own lives, even before they might be understandably consumed. They go there and they start thinking, if I'm out there having fun, this is somehow a betrayal. You said that people often confuse
sacrifice.
Yes.
Yeah. If I sacrifice my life, then I'm being a better caregiver. Not really. If you sacrifice your life, you're actually a smaller person because you don't have that other life. You don't have the richness of that life to bring to the task of caregiving, right? And sacrificing your life isn't going to change the course of the disease.
Right.
Right. I mean, it's almost like it's almost like punishing yourself, well, they have a disease, so I can't have a life. You didn't do it. You didn't give them the disease. I mean, why are you in prison now? Because they have a disease. So you can grieve and you can be hurting and struggling through this and dealing with all the things you're dealing with and still go have a nice time and still laugh, right? And still have a life. You can do all of that.
You really have to, right?
And you have to. Otherwise, because the fact of the matter is that caregivers are the ones with the stress, which then leads to health problems. I mean, statistically, caregivers end up having more health problems and even dying before the person they're caring for. The person with dementia doesn't have any stress. Every moment's new, right? Even if they get upset in 15 minutes, they've forgotten about it. The caregiver is going to remember it 15 days later. So they're the ones with the stress. And I've seen it. I've seen people, get, I mean, there was one man who got one of those lung diseases that you get from like the desert or something. Oh, valley fever, I think.
Yeah.
Well, you get that like out in the desert from breathing in sand and dust. He wasn't out in the desert.
Wow.
And he got it, and he was on, antibiotics and the ways that they treat it and stuff. But I pointed out to him that in Chinese medicine, the lungs are the organ for grief. So, it kind of didn't surprise me that he had something going on with his lungs.
Well, it all makes sense. But the one thing you say is that even when people intellectually understand, okay, it's not logical to think that I can't have any enjoyment in my life because my loved one has Alzheimer's, even when they understand that intellectually, it can be really hard for them to feel it on an emotional level and change their behavior.
But it's like deciding I want to grow up. I mean, that's sort of the pathway. You make these decisions intellectually, and then your emotions catch up to that.
You have the analogy of the oxygen mask.
Mm-hmm.
And, if even that, maybe that could help some caregivers realize, okay, I'm important. I need to be taking care of myself. That in itself is justified. But beyond that, if you're not taking care of yourself, you can't take care of someone else.
There's also that great, I was sitting here trying to remember it so I didn't get it wrong. There's that great thing in AA. It's easier to act your way into a new way of thinking than it is to think your way into a new way of acting, right? So if you want to be more giving, if you want to be more, just act like that, So if you're out to dinner with friends and you don't really feel like you should be having a good time, just act like you're having a good time, Your emotions will catch up to that, right? Your emotions will go, oh, right, this actually feels a lot better, we were talking about control before, if you're trying to get away from being a controlling person, just act like you're not. Find some role model or something that, somebody who's easygoing and just think of somebody, emulate them, act like it. And then it will kind of start to become, your emotional musculature will catch up to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, alongside of that, the thing about the oxygen mask, if it drops and you're with a child or someone who can't help themselves, you put yours on first. Because how are you going to help someone if you're fighting for breath?
Yeah.
And by the way, the person with dementia, they might not be aware cognitively, but they are hyper aware emotionally because they're not aware cognitively. They don't have that cognition to be able to rationalize someone else's behavior. So if you come in a room and you're stressed out and you're, in this prison of this is all I am, I'm caring for someone, my loved one with Alzheimer's, that's all I have in my life right now, and you have that stress going on, they will pick up on it, and they don't have the ability to go, oh, I see why she's doing that or he's doing that. All right, I get it, because this is how they're constructing their life. They can't do that anymore. So all they're getting is sort of the backwash of your emotions, and it's accentuated for them.
And you also say that if you think you're hiding your emotions from them, you probably need to think again. So what? Yeah.
No, same thing. They're going to pick up on, because they're in a raw state, right? Like that's what they don't have that filter of being able to sort of analyze things, you know, and go, okay, you know, I see what they're, you know, I see how they're acting, but I can figure this out, right? They can't figure anything out. So they're just going to feel all of your emotions. You know, that's why laughing around someone who has dementia is a really good thing. You know, you're not, I mean, I wouldn't advise someone to laugh at someone, but people with dementia do funny things sometimes. It's okay to laugh at that. You're not laughing at them. You're laughing because they did something funny. And when you start laughing, they start laughing. I mean, I know with my father, if that happened, then he would like start making funny faces or something like that. You know, he would pick up on the laughter and he'd laugh and he'd want you to laugh more. So, you know, he'd figure, well, I'll make funny faces and I'll keep the laughter going.
Right. Well, and I also thought that was the emotional angle is really interesting for how you talk about communicating, you know, how you communicate with someone who isn't, who can't understand your words. You can still communicate through emotions.
Yeah.
They can communicate with you.
Yeah. And a lot of trying to understand what someone is, because it becomes word salad after a while, you know, with someone with dementia. And I mean, you can't figure it out if you're listening to the words. But if you listen to the cadence of what they're saying and sort of the emotional resonance that's underneath it, you can kind of get a sense of that. And you can respond in kind. You know, if they're worried about something, if they're scared about something, if they're angry about something, you know, you can fashion some kind of response that's going to go to the emotions of what they're communicating rather than the words, which are meaningless at that point.
What about the other component about things where you talk a lot about how often, even as soon as someone's diagnosed, people start to treat them differently. They start to talk to them as if they're a child. It can progress to the point where, you know, people are talking about them in front of them, talking about their illness in front of them as if they're not there.
Yeah.
What do you say to people who say, well, it doesn't matter, they can't understand me?
It's horrible. I gave an example of early on when I started my support group, a couple, you know, my support group when I was running it was for caregivers. I mean, you didn't bring your loved one with Alzheimer's to the group. It was so you could talk about them when they're not there. And the woman didn't understand that for some reason, and she brought her husband, and she came a little late, and I was looking at him. We were already talking to somebody else, and I was looking at him, and I was thinking, oh Lord, I think I know what's going on here. And so I skipped over to her, and she immediately started talking about him. He was such a sweet looking man. I mean, he was dressed very dapper, and you could just tell he was a really sweet man. And she was talking about him in third person, you know, like he does this and he does that. And I was about to say something, and my co-facilitator was about to say something. Literally, we had our mouths open to stop her, and someone from the group did it and beat us to it and said, you know, we're all really uncomfortable with, he said, first of all, he shouldn't even be here. And then I did jump in and say, you know, this is a group for caregivers, not, he shouldn't be here. And my co-facilitator then ended up taking him out into the hallway. And I let the man who had started this continue and say, you know, we're really uncomfortable with you talking about him in third person as if he's not even here. And she didn't even get it, you know. Well, he can't understand anything. He can't understand what I'm saying. And, you know, I tried very patiently my hands were shaking by the end of that because it made me angry. It made me angry that cruelty, you know, that there's a human being there. You married this person and you're treating them like they don't even exist. And I mean, I think I did a good job of not showing my anger to her, but I'm telling you, I looked at my hands and they were like shaking. My cat is trying to join our discussion. She likes to do that.
She's very welcome.
Yeah. So, and I think it sort of starts at the beginning with that. People tend to talk louder, and they, tend to speak as if assuming that person is not going to understand what they're saying. And at a certain point, they might not understand what you're saying, but at the very beginning, at least give them the chance to understand it. Don't turn down that path, because it might be a difficult one to get off of.
Right. And you also say, we don't know what's going on in their heads. And,
No.
We don't, like you say, they can pick up on the emotional content, even if they're not registering the words. But even, you talk about people will have moments of lucidity.
Yeah.
So I think.
Yeah. And you have to be, if you, again, if you've already decided what this is all going to be, you will miss that. You have to really have to live in the moment, because they're living in the moment. So if you want to have any kind of connection with them, that's where you have to be. And, even in the latter stages, when someone has drifted off, you don't know where they are or what's going on. I gave the example of my father when he was already bedridden for the last 3 years of his life. And when he was lying in bed, he had his hands up like this and he was going like this. And one of his nurses said to me, "I wonder what he's doing." And I said, "He's writing," because he wrote English. And you when you write English, you use both hands from the reins. You don't have single hand like Western. And I said, "He's writing." I was sure that I was right. And I'm still sure that I'm right, because that's what it looked like to me.
And that's one thing I really liked about what you said. You're really telling people, don't project onto that person, especially in the later stages. You don't know what they're experiencing. Don't make it this horrible thing that you're assuming is
right. So another example was a man said to me his mother was in a facility. She was in the latter stages of Alzheimer's, and he said, when I go visit her, she's just sitting by the window looking out and not saying anything. And the people at the facility said she doesn't really interact a lot with the other residents there, and she's just sort of off by herself. And he said, so I just feel awful, because I'm the only socialization that she gets when I come every few days to visit her. And it's really sad. She's just so lonely and stuff. And I said, hold on. I said, you have no idea where she's drifted off to in her head. She could be walking on a beach in the Bahamas at sunset with a gorgeous man, and then you show up and ruin the whole thing. Right? You don't know. Does she look, I said, does she look content? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, then, right? You don't know. If she looks content, she looks happy. Generally speaking, the weird thing about this disease is that the latter stages are kind of easier than the earlier stages, because the person has drifted past the trauma of knowing that they have a disease that's taking them away. And they've just drifted off to wherever they've drifted off to. And usually it's an okay place.
The other thing, you've touched on it already, but you talk about how all they have is the present moment. Mm-hmm. And so if you want to, I think in the book you call it, you want to bridge that gap with them, you have to meet them there.
Yeah.
So in practical terms, what do you mean by that? And how do you do that?
You figure out where they are, in that moment. And it may be that they're far away and they've drifted off somewhere. That's okay. Then you don't need to try to haul them back. You just sit there with them. Silence is okay. We tend to want to fill up the silence. It's okay. Just be silent with them, or if they have retreated back to some other time in their life and they think that it's 7th grade lunch hour and they're waiting for their friend Mary to have lunch with them, go with it. Right? Wherever they're at, just go there with them. Don't try to correct them and say, no, you're not in 7th grade anymore. Yeah, they are. In their head, they are. Right? Don't argue with them. Right? Be wherever they are. and make up whatever stories you have to. I mean, I have a whole chapter on in this book on creative lying, which is a great tool. Where most of us are raised to not tell a lie. In the realm of Alzheimer's, lying is your friend, right? If they are waiting for a dead relative to come visit them, don't tell them that that person is dead. If they understand that, then they're going to have to grieve, and then they'll forget it. And what are you going to do? Keep telling them? It'll be like Groundhog Day for grief. Yeah. Just they're on an ocean cruise and they have no cell service right now, but they'll come see you when they get back. Just make stuff up, right? It'd be easier. It'll make them feel better. It's the kinder thing to do.
Right. Do you find, though, that a lot of people have trouble with that? They feel like they need to correct? Is that?
Yes, because that's what we do in our regular life. If somebody says something incorrect, we correct them. And most of us don't want to lie to people. We think that that's wrong. So it is about re-educating yourself in this context. It's not about, going out into your entire life and becoming a liar, but in this one context, it's just the kinder thing to do. And it's the more sensible thing to do to allow. You're not going to win the argument anyway. I gave an example in here. A friend of mine has a friend who has Lewy body dementia, which is incredibly cruel. I mean, that's just one of the, other than frontotemporal dementia, which is even more cruel, Lewy body dementia is just brutal. I mean, it's, for people who don't know, it's a combination really of Parkinson's and dementia, but it's a roller coaster. It's less about memory loss and more just about this roller coaster of emotions. Hallucinations are a part of it. It's what Robin Williams had.
Right.
And so it's brutal. And my friend has a friend who was diagnosed with Lewy body, and she thought that there were men on the roof, and she was certain of it and was very upset by it. And he called me and he said, I keep telling her there are no men on the roof, and she won't believe me. And I said, well, stop doing that. Because to her, she's hallucinating that there are men on the roof. Tell her, yes, you're right. And I got them off. I chased them away. They're gone now. But if they come back, you tell me, and I'll chase them away again. All right? Just go with it. Make something up. But you don't want to tell them they're wrong.
One of the co-facilitators in your support group, you said they often said the antidote for guilt is gratitude. And I know you talk about, like, there's so much guilt often in the caregiving journey, grief and pain and all these things. How do you get to that place of gratitude? And why would you what would you tell somebody? Why is it important that they make that effort?
Well, first of all, I mean, what I've said about guilt is that this is how I envision guilt, that it's this little muscle that we have in our brain. And it's there for a reason. It's there so that when we do bad things, we feel guilty about it. And if we hurt someone's feelings, we feel guilty about it. But sometimes that muscle just likes to flex itself for no reason. So what I think works is just to talk to that muscle and go, you know what, thank you. I'm so glad you're here. And I definitely need you. But I don't need you right now. Right? So you need to be quiet now. You need to just go dormant right now because I don't need you right now. Because the things that you feel normally that you feel guilty about in the realm of Alzheimer's, there's no reason to feel guilty about, Well, I should have done this better. I should have known that they were going to open the front door and walk out. Really? I mean, things happen, and it's not your fault. You didn't do it deliberately. So you learn from that. Using that scenario, let's say they did walk out the front door and go down. I am so grateful they only got half a block before I realized they were gone and I could bring them back. Right? And now I know. And now I know that I have to really look at the lock situation and maybe get an in-home caregiver to watch them all the time because I can't watch them all the time. And Thank you that this wasn't worse, right? So there's always something to, thank you for this lesson that I learned from this, rather than, oh no, I should have done that better. I should have done that differently. Right. It's mental training. You decide, this is how I'm going to look at it. And then your emotions kind of catch up to that. You don't get it emotionally at first. You make a decision of how you're going to look at something.
It's interesting with gratitude, because it's just, so much research on how good for your mental health it is. But people feel like, a lot of people feel like, it's just so a Pollyanna kind of take on life, or I'm forcing things that I don't really feel. And your point, is that you are changing the way you feel by your actions.
Yeah, exactly. And by deciding to change. And by the way, if anybody revisits the story of Pollyanna, she was like a saint. I mean, she believed in the good in people. She believed that she had faith that things were going to turn out well. I mean, people talk about Pollyanna as if it's a bad thing.
True.
I would love to know someone like that. I'd love to be that person, Yeah. So that's actually a good example to try to follow. I had one of my support groups was, I think, like a couple of nights or a few nights after, I believe it was the Pulse nightclub shooting. There's so many shootings, we have to try to think, which one am I referring to? But I think it was the Pulse nightclub. And I said to the group, I was thinking after this shooting that we gather here for this long goodbye, and we talk about our grief, and we talk about the pain of losing a loved one. But the one thing that we have in this disease is time. We have time with that loved one. We have time with our feelings. We have time with the whole experience of them and with them. Those people who died didn't have any of that. Their lives were over like that. And their lives were over looking into the face of evil. Usually people with dementia die between clean sheets and hopefully with loved ones around. They didn't have that. They died in horrific circumstances. And their loved ones and their family members and their friends got that phone call, or maybe, God forbid, found it out on the news and lost them in a second. So with everything that we grieve over with this disease, let's look at that too. If there's a way to go, this is not the worst way to go.
And like one thing that I just keep thinking about again with the book, and you've said this earlier on in our conversation, but Alzheimer's for you really brought unexpected gifts, as you call them. And, your point really is that Alzheimer's teaches you lessons that you don't think you could learn in other ways.
Yeah, I don't think I would have learned the idea of kind of stepping back and looking at the bigger picture, or that I had the power and the ability to make a decision in my mind of, this is not who I want to be. This is not how I want to be. So I'm going to change that. I'm going to work on changing that, like, consistently. I'm going to just sort of have that as like this Post-it in my head all the time. And sometimes I'll get it wrong and sometimes I'll get it right. But this is my goal. I don't know that I would have had the confidence in myself before to do that. But I sort of had nothing to lose, I mean, the disease was what it was, and the reality was what it was. If I wanted to show up and as I said, show up fully, that's what I had to do. So I might as well try it.
Yeah. And that is such an empowering message, because as you point out, you have no control over the disease.
Right.
But with your behavior, how you respond to the situation, what you choose to take from it, that is in your control.
Just like that person said to me about control, patience is, I mean, I'm not naturally the most patient person, but I learned that I learned that with Alzheimer's. And you can either learn it or not learn it, but again, it's a choice. And I think that's who we are supposed to be. We're not supposed to go through this life as being, impatient, restless, can't focus people.
You write in the book, among all the lessons that Alzheimer's taught me, the lesson of acceptance towers above everything.
Well, the acceptance of that you don't have control. The acceptance that this disease is going to run the course that it runs. And, I had like this mantra every time I went up to my parents' house, where I would say to myself, I have no idea what I'm walking into here. I have no idea how my father's going to be today. I have no idea how my mother's going to be today, which was kind of a constant of my life. But please, God, let me just accept and learn from whatever I walk into, whatever this next couple of hours brings me, just please let me accept it. And actually, I sort of learned that, although I don't think I was taught that early on by my father. I don't think I really learned it then, but I remembered at that time that he told me this story about when he was playing football in college, and he used to pray before the game that his team would win. And then he suddenly realized that, the other team's members wanted to win as much as he did. So he changed his prayer. He changed his prayer to God, whoever wins this game, please let me accept it. And I heard that when I was younger, and I knew it meant a lot. And so I, remembered it and retained it, but it didn't really hook into me until he had Alzheimer's. And I thought, yeah, that's kind of what I'm doing every time I come up to this house.
Well, I know we're running out of time here, but I did want to ask you about about your support group that you started.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd love to hear a little bit more about it and your goals for what you want that to be.
Well, I started it in 2011, and I ran it for 6 years, twice a week with a co-facilitator. I stopped running it in 2017 for two reasons, actually. One was time. I'd only managed to publish one book in those 6 years, and because it's not just showing up 2 nights a week and running a group. There's a lot of other outside work, and I really needed to get back to my life as an author. And quite frankly, the other reason was when I'd written some things journalistically, I'd gotten death threats, one serious enough that I had to contact the FBI. And I was really haunted by the thought that I was putting other people at risk. I mean, anybody could walk into that group, and the website for Beyond Alzheimer's, had the schedule there. And, there was a security guy there, but he wasn't armed. And, anybody could walk in. And I was just really haunted by that. So I thought, I'm going to take this to I'm going to shut down the group. I'm not going to run anymore. But I'm going to try to license it to hospitals. From the moment I conceived of the group, I only wanted it to be in hospitals, because I think that hospitals and the medical community should step up and take care of caregivers. And also because my co-facilitators were always doctors, so they could fill in that gap. So I embarked on, trying to license it to hospitals. I got a lot of no's. Only Geisinger in Pennsylvania and Cleveland Clinic in Las Vegas did license the group. I got a lot of no's, mostly saying, oh, it's just not in our budget. Running the group once a week, if they paid the facilitators what I was paying my co-facilitator, it would run a hospital about $30,000 a year, which is nothing for a hospital. So what I heard when I heard it's not in our budget was, we don't care enough. Right? We don't care enough about, so I would still like that to happen. I hope maybe it will, but that's really what propelled me to write Floating in the Deep End, because I thought, okay, fine. If you're not going to have this in hospitals, then I'm going to put out a book that people can get their help that way, carry it with them and dog ear the book or have it on their phone or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
So that's how the book came about.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk about this. I just really found this book to be so helpful. And you say, I think caregivers, there's just not a lot of support out there for caregivers. And
no, there isn't.
And I love that you're raising awareness about the importance of it. I mean, it's not just about them, it's about the patient. It's, it's such a critical thing. So thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you.
It's just truly a pleasure.
Thanks. Well, I enjoyed it.